The first thing I saw was the pale, wet center of a 42-inch oak stump. The second was my neighbor, Henry Vale, standing on his balcony with a coffee mug in his hand, looking straight through the space where 3 trees had stood for longer than either one of us had been alive. They leaned over the line. He called down to me. I had every right to clear my side. 3 mature valley oaks, one 49 inches across at the trunk. On a 42, 136, they had shaded my back fence, held the bank above the drainage channel, and made our little corner of Sacramento feel like it existed before the subdivisions did. Henry had them cut down on a Thursday morning while I was 40 miles away at a supplier meeting. He figured he had solved a view problem before putting his new house on the market. What he did not know was that the black camera above his own garage had recorded his landscaping crew walking through my side gate, marking my trees, and cutting them down for my property. He also did not know that Anna Morales had spent 15 years reading the kind of county records wealthy people assume nobody else will bother to find. By the time it was over, Henry did not just pay for 3 replacement trees. He paid for mature replacements, restoration work, permit penalties, unarborist, and the loss in value caused by cutting protected oaks without approval. More importantly, the man who had tried to shame me at an HOA meeting had to stand at the same podium and admit, in front of the whole neighborhood, that he had cut down trees that were never his to touch. But that is getting ahead of it. The story really began 11 days earlier, with a listing photographer and a man who wanted one uninterrupted view of the American River Parkway. My name is Daniel Reese. I am 51. I run a small commercial lighting supply business, and I had lived on Hawthorne Bluff Lane for 14 years when Henry bought the house next door. Our neighborhood sits on the east side of Sacramento, in one of those older developments built carefully around the landscape, and then slowly surrounded by newer, shinier money. The houses are not mansions, exactly, but they are close enough that people use words like times, estate times, when they are trying to impress somebody. Behind our lots is a shallow, natural swale that runs toward a protected greenbelt. Beyond that, on clear winter mornings, you can see a strip of the river corridor through the trees. The 3 oaks were the reason I bought my place. They stood near the shared side boundary but fully inside my parcel. In a loose line behind my workshop, my survey showed the nearest trunk was 6 feet, 8 inches from the property line. The farthest was nearly 13 feet inside it. Their roots held the slope together. Their branches stretched over parts of Henry's yard, the way old oak branches do. But the trees belonged to my land. There was never any mystery about that. My daughter, Claire, had a swing on the lowest branch of the smaller oak when she was young. My late wife, Mata, used to call the biggest one the old judge because it stood there silently through every argument, every birthday barbecue, every bad patch in our marriage. After Mara passed away, I could not look at the backyard without seeing her under that tree, holding a glass of iced tea and telling me I worked too much. So no, I did not see them as landscaping. I saw them as part of home. Henry Vale moved in 9 months before the cutting. He was 60-ish, smooth-haired, always dressed like he had stepped out of a brochure for luxury real estate. He had made money in commercial development and bought the house after a divorce. His first conversation with me was friendly enough. He told me he planned to refresh the place and maybe sell it within a year if the market came back around. Then he looked past me, at the oak canopy. Beautiful trees, he said, though they eat a lot of the view. I told him they had been there long before either house. He smiled as if I had made a charming little joke. Over the next few months, Henry kept finding reasons to bring them up. Acorns in his pool, leaves on his patio, shade over the far edge of his new landscaping. I listened, because I am not unreasonable. I had the branches that crossed directly over his roof trimmed by a licensed arborist. I paid for it myself, even though I did not have to. The arborist removed deadwood and made a few clean reductions. He also told Henry plainly, while I was standing there, that the trees were healthy and that aggressive cutting could trigger permit requirements. Henry nodded like he understood. Then he installed a row of tall, expensive glass panels on his balcony and began talking about sunset photos. The first real warning came at our HOA architectural meeting in April. I only went because I had submitted plans to repaint my shed. Henry was there to request approval for exterior improvements before listing his house. When the board asked if anyone had comments, he raised his hand and said the oak canopy was a serious maintenance and marketability issue. He did not say my name, but everyone knew what he meant. Trees that lean into a neighboring property create a shared risk. He said, it would be wise for the association to encourage owners to keep vegetation from obstructing views and creating debris burdens. I told the board that the trees were inspected, healthy, and protected under the county's tree rules. Our HOA president, Gail Mercer, said the board had no authority to order removal of a healthy tree on a private lot. That should have ended it. After the meeting, Henry caught me near the parking lot. Daniel, I'm trying to sell a house with a premium view, he said. You are treating 3 trees like family members. They are on my property, I said, and they are not coming down. His face did not change much. That was the thing about Henry. He did not yell. He made you feel like he had already written down your objection and placed it in a file labeled Times Irrelevant. We'll see what the boundary actually supports, he said. At the time, I thought he meant he would hire a surveyor. I wish he had. On the Thursday it happened. I left home at 7:10 the morning. A restaurant project in Elk Grove had received the wrong fixtures, and I needed to meet a distributor. I remember locking my workshop and looking at the trees because the sun was coming through them in that soft, dusty way it does in early fall. At noe trades it shiopt. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor across the street. Mrs. Patel, are you having tree work done? I was walking into a warehouse. I texted back, no. Why? She sent a blurry photo. In it, a white truck was backed into Henry's driveway. 2 men in helmets stood near my side gate. Behind them, through the open gate, I could see orange cones in my yard. I called Henry. Straight to voicemail. I called again. No answer. Then I called the number on the truck. It belonged to a company called Capital Crown Tree Service. A dispatcher told me the crew was working under a contract signed by Henry Vale at 118 Hawthorne Bluff. They are not authorized to touch trees on 116. I said. The dispatcher sounded confused. The customer said the trees were on the boundary and dangerous. They are not dangerous. Tell them to stop right now. She said she would radio the foreman 60.com. I got in my truck and made the 40-minute drive home in 26 minutes, which I do not recommend and will not pretend was wise. When I turned onto my street, I knew before I saw the yard. The air smelled like fresh-cut oak. It is a sweet smell, almost warm, but that day it made my stomach turn. 1 tree was down across the back corner of my yard, its limbs already cut into sections. The second was nothing but a stump. The third had been felled toward the swale, its crown caught in the brush. There were deep tire tracks across my lawn. My side gate stood open. A man with a chainsaw was cutting the last big limb off the largest oak. I got out of my truck and yelled, "Stop!" The saw shut off. For a second, nobody moved. Then Henry came around from his patio, still wearing a pressed polo shirt. He did not look startled. He looked annoyed that I had arrived before the cleanup was finished. "Daniel," he said, "I told the crew this might upset you. Those are my trees. The trunks were compromised by the boundary. The limbs were over my property. I had an obligation to remove a hazard. I pointed at the largest stump. That stump is 10 feet inside my property." Henry glanced down at it and shrugged. "The root flare is not the legal line. The canopy was on my side." The crew made a reasonable call. The foreman stepped forward, pale under his helmet. "Sir." The homeowner told us they were boundary trees. We saw a stake near the fence. "That stake is his irrigation marker." I said, "My survey pins are farther in." Henry gave the foreman a look that shut him up. I did not touch anybody. I did not threaten anybody. I pulled out my phone and recorded everything, the stumps, the truck, the workers, the gate, Henry's face. Then I called the Sacramento County non-emergency line and asked for an officer to document a property dispute. I also called the county's tree office and left a message. Henry leaned close enough that I could smell his aftershave. "Do not turn this into theater," he said quietly. "I am willing to cover a few nursery trees. But don't pretend I committed some kind of crime because you are sentimental about landscaping." That was the moment I stopped trying to make him understand what he had taken. He understood. He just believed money would make the question disappear. The deputy who arrived did exactly what I expected. He said the ownership issue was civil, took photographs, and created an incident number, but he also noted that the workers were inside my fenced yard when he arrived, and that Henry admitted signing the contract. That mattered later. The county tree technician returned my call that afternoon. After I sent photos and the trunk measurements, she told me not to remove any wood, grind the stumps, or disturb the area. Oaks of that size could fall under local protection rules, especially on parcels near designated open space drainage corridors. She said an inspector would come out the next morning. Henry's response was to send me a 2-paragraph email at 6:12 that evening. The trees presented a clear visual and maintenance burden. They were removed in good faith after my contractor confirmed they straddled the property boundary. I reject any accusation of trespass. Please do not contact my listing agent or interfere with my sale. He had copied Gail, the HOA president. I read it 3 times. Then I called Anna. Anna Morales did not advertise herself as a lawyer, because she was not one. She was a retired title examiner and former county record specialist who lived 2 streets over Lordy HN. She had helped more than a few neighbors understand surveys, easements, permit files, and the difference between what an HOA president said and what the documents actually said. Anna had a calm voice, a blue binder for every subject on earth, and 0 patience for somebody who used confidence as a substitute for facts. When I told her what happened, she was quiet for a moment. "Daniel," she said, "do you still have your closing survey? In the house?" "Good. Find it. And do not argue with Henry tonight. He has already said too much in writing." The county inspector came at 8:15 the next morning. Her name was Rosa Bell. She measured each stump and took photographs of the exposed root zones, the tire ruts, and the cut surfaces. The biggest tree, she said, was a valley oak with a diameter of just under 49 inches. The other 2 were also native oaks, well over the threshold at which removal required a permit in our area. "Did you authorize removal?" she asked. "No." "Did your neighbor show you a permit?" "No." She wrote that down, then looked across the fence toward Henry's house. Workers were already pressure washing his patio for listing photos. "I can't decide a boundary dispute," Rosa said, "but I can investigate unpermitted removal. And based on what I see, this deserves an enforcement file." Anna arrived after lunch with a folding table, a tape measure, and a folder thick enough to stop a door. We found my 2012 Alta survey, the original parcel map, and the title documents from when Mara and I bought the house. My 2 iron survey monuments were still there, buried under leaves but intact. The oak stump sat well inside the line, exactly as the map said. Anna measured from the monuments to the stumps twice. Then she looked at me over her glasses. "He did not make a mistake," she said. "A mistake is cutting a branch. This is a decision." She helped me hire a licensed surveyor, not because we doubted the map, but because an independent current survey would remove every excuse Henry planned to make. The surveyor, a man named Luis Ortega, came out on Monday. His final drawing placed the stumps 6, 9 feet, 8 feet, and 12, 6 feet inside my parcel. He flagged the boundary in bright pink stakes from front to back. By then, Henry had listed his house. The listing photos showed the whole point of what he had done. A wide, clean view from his balcony across the greenbelt. No branch. No shade. Just an expensive house looking out over a bare slope. Anna told me to send one measured letter before we did anything else. Not a demand full of insults. Not a social media post. A chance to fix what could still be fixed. We included the survey, the county case number, photographs, and an arborist's preliminary assessment. The letter asked Henry to preserve all video, message, contracts, invoices, and communications related to the removal. It gave him 7 business days to confirm that he would cooperate with the county, pay for a full valuation and restoration plan, and stop representing the trees as boundary hazards. His reply came through a lawyer 2 days later. The lawyer claimed Henry had acted under an honest belief that the trees were jointly owned. He offered $4,500 as a neighborly compromise and asked me to sign a release. The letter also suggested I had failed to maintain the trees properly. $4,500. 3 mature native oaks. Their removal. Their value. The slope restoration. The lost shade. And the permit exposure. $4,500. Anna read the letter, set it down, and smiled in a way that made me nervous. He's scared of the wrong thing, she said. Henry was worried about whether the trees technically crossed a line. He was not worried enough about why his crew had entered a locked side gate, why they had cut every trunk from my side, or why he had a camera pointed directly at the work zone. I had noticed that camera the day of the cutting. Henry had installed 4 high-definition security cameras after moving in. One sat above his garage and faced the driveway, sidewalk, and the angle of my side gate. It was visible in Mrs. Patel's original photo. If it worked, and Henry had told everyone at an HOA meeting that he could see every delivery and contractor, then it had recorded the entire operation. Anna asked the surveyor to photograph the camera's sight line. Then she looked up Henry's permit application for the camera system, which included a basic site plan. The field of view was drawn right over the gate and the back access path. Send a preservation request, she said. Specific date, specific time window, specific device. The request went out that afternoon. Henry's attorney replied that the system had automatically overwritten routine footage and that no relevant video was available. That might have been enough, if not for one small detail. Henry had just installed the system 4 months earlier. The product manual, which Anna found online, advertised 30 days of local storage and optional cloud backup. And Henry had told Mrs. Patel he had saved clips from the morning because he was concerned I might make trouble. Mrs. Patel did not gossip. She wrote down dates and times in a little calendar by her kitchen phone. She remembered the conversation exactly. We did not need to break into anything. We did not need to bluff. We gave the information to the attorney handling my civil claim and to the county investigator. The attorney sent a formal evidence preservation notice. The county added the missing footage issue to its file. Then a subpoena request went to the service provider once the case was filed. That was the moment Henry stopped acting like he had nothing to hide. It did not make him cooperative. It made him careful. The following Monday, a tan envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a page from Capital Crown Tree Services work order. The customer name was Henry Vale. The job description had been crossed out in blue ink, but you could still read the original words underneath it. Remove 3 oak trees from adjacent parcel for view clearance. Someone had written over it, boundary hazard reduction. There was no note. There did not need to be. The foreman had seen the survey stakes go in. He had seen the county inspector taking pictures. He also had a business to protect, and a company can lose a license faster than a homeowner can lose an argument. Anna told me not to call the crew or try to play detective. You don't reward a useful document by turning it into a neighborhood brawl, she said. We let the lawyer request the original and let the county ask the questions. That was harder than it sounds. I wanted to know who had dropped it off. I wanted to know what else they had heard Henry say. But the whole reason Henry had been able to push me around was that he assumed I would react emotionally and give him something he could use. I was not going to hand him that. Instead, I walked my property with Anna and Rosa. The county inspector, when they came to document the damage again, the first rain of the season had put muddy water in the swale, Without the oaks, the bank above it looked raw. The roots had held that soil together for decades. Now the tire tracks had cut channels through it, and clumps of dirt were already sliding toward the drainage area. Rosa shook her head. "This is why the permit process exists," she said. "People think a tree removal is just a tree removal. Then the site starts moving." She added a notice requiring temporary erosion controls. It was addressed to Henry because the work crew had entered through his drive, worked under his contract, and caused the ground disturbance. He tried to object through his attorney, claiming I should be responsible because the trees stood on my parcel. The county's answer was plain. The person who ordered unpermitted work bears responsibility for the impact of that work. That was the first bill he could not call sentimental. The second problem came from his listing. Henry's agent had put the house online with a sentence that said, "Unobstructed greenbelt and parkway views from newly refreshed outdoor spaces." It was polished language, but the timestamp was not. The listing went live less than 3 days after the trees were cut. The before and after photos in the agent's marketing folder showed exactly what he had paid for. Branches in the before shot, clear sky in the after. Anna downloaded every public page and saved it with the date visible. "People think deleting a listing fixes history," she said. "It usually just tells people which part of history made them nervous." Henry did delete the phrase later that week. By then, it was already in the evidence file. He also started talking to neighbors. I found that out when Mrs. Patel stopped me at the curb while I was dragging my bins in. "Mr. Vale says your trees were dropping limbs on his roof," she said, not accusing me, just concerned. "He says he offered to pay and you're trying to take his house." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. I told her the truth. I was asking for a survey, a tree valuation, and compliance with the county. Nothing more. I did not mention the camera. I did not show her the anonymous work order. I was not going to turn each neighbor into a juror. "Mrs. Patel nodded slowly. "I saw the truck," she said, "and I saw the men go through your gate." "Would you be willing to write that down?" Anna asked when I told her. Mrs. Patel agreed. Her statement was simple. She had heard chainsaws. She had photographed the truck at 9:34 a.m. She had seen workers enter through my side gate. She had not seen anyone trying to stop them. That was all. Sometimes the strongest evidence is boring because it does not need to be dramatic. Henry's lawyer sent another letter after that. This one was sharper. It accused me of soliciting false witness accounts and warned that I could be liable for interfering with a pending real estate transaction. He offered $7, Wu-Bei, with a condition that I remove the survey stakes and agree not to mention the incident to the HOA. Anna read the condition twice, then slid the letter across the kitchen table. "He wants you silent before the video comes in," she said. "What if it doesn't?" I asked. "Then he still cut down your trees without consent? That does not disappear. But he knows it does." We rejected the offer. Politely, the response stated that I would not remove lawful survey markers from my own property and that I would not sign a release while the county investigation was active. It gave Henry one final chance to preserve the security footage and provide it voluntarily. He declined again. That night, I sat in the dark on the back step longer than I should have. The yard sounded wrong. Oak leaves have a dry, restless sound in a breeze. Without them, I could hear every car on the parkway and every dog 3 houses over. I kept looking at the stumps as if the trees might be there when I looked back. My daughter Claire called while I was sitting there. She lives in Folsom now with her husband and little boy. I had not told her much because I knew it would upset her. "Dad," she said after I finally explained, "that was Mom's tree." "I know. Are you okay?" I wanted to say yes. I said, "I'm trying to be." She was quiet for a second. "Then don't let him tell you it was nothing." That sentence stayed with me. I did not need Henry to feel what I felt. I just needed the record to say it was not nothing. The county investigator interviewed the Capitol Crown foreman the next morning. We learned later that he had initially said he believed the trees were on Henry's lot. When the investigator showed him the original work order and the survey, he changed his account. He said Henry had walked the property with him 2 days before the cutting. He said Henry pointed past the fence and told him the trees would be dealt with. He also said he asked whether Henry had written authorization from the neighboring owner. Henry's answer, according to the foreman, was, "Daniel won't know what he's looking at. I've handled these things before." The foreman should have walked away. He admitted that. Capital Crown later agreed to provide records, cooperate with the county, and cover part of the emergency erosion control work as part of its own administrative settlement. That did not erase their part in it, but it made the facts clearer. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine. Annual budget, pool resurfacing, holiday lighting rules. Henry showed up anyway, with his lawyer, and asked for open floor time. He stood in front of 30 residents and said he was being targeted over a long-running tree disagreement. He said the county's involvement was a disproportionate effort to weaponize bureaucracy. Then he looked toward me and added, "Some people confuse living next to an asset with owning the right to control everybody else's use of it." I did not respond. Gail, the HOA president, did. "Mr. Val," she said, "the association does not have authority to decide a county tree enforcement matter, and we do not have evidence that Mr. Reese has done anything improper." Henry's face tightened. "You're supposed to protect property values." "We are," Gail said. "That includes protecting owners from unauthorized work on their lots." For the first time, he looked surprised. He had expected the board to give him a platform. Instead, the minutes recorded that the HOA took no position on his claim and would preserve all correspondence related to the dispute. A small thing, maybe, but Henry had used the HOA meeting to embarrass me. Now, the HOA record would not help him rewrite what happened. If you're enjoying stories where facts beat arrogance, subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. Around here, the loudest person is not always the one with the right paperwork. The preservation request for Henry's camera footage went out the next morning. His attorney answered with the same line. The system overwrote the relevant data in the normal course of operation, but the answer came with an attachment no one had noticed before. It listed the cameras by model number. Anna read the model number, then went quiet. "Daniel," she said, "this system doesn't overwrite in 7 days. The installation manual said 30 days of local storage at the highest setting, longer at the setting Henry used. The invoice also included a cloud backup subscription. Henry had not just installed cameras, he had paid extra to keep clips." Then Mrs. Patel remembered something else. On the afternoon of the cutting, Henry had come to her door and asked if her doorbell camera had caught his worker's truck. He said he wanted footage in case Daniel gets aggressive. Mrs. Patel told him no, but she remembered seeing Henry tap through clips on his own phone while he spoke. That meant he had accessed the recording after the trees were down. It meant he had seen what it showed. And if he had deleted it after receiving a preservation notice, that became a problem separate from the trees themselves. Anna placed a hand on the stack of documents between us. "Now," she said, "we stop asking him to do the right thing and let the process ask for it." He called an emergency HOA meeting. The notice said he wanted to discuss unsafe vegetation, neighborhood property values, and harassment by a neighboring owner. I knew exactly who that neighboring owner was supposed to be. For a few hours, I wanted to stay home. I was tired. I was grieving trees nobody else had known the way I had. The idea of sitting in a clubhouse while Henry rewrote the story made my skin crawl. Anna would not let me skip it. "You don't need to perform," she said. "You need to be present when the facts arrive." The HOA clubhouse was full that Tuesday. Henry had invited his listing agent, his lawyer, and 2 members of the architectural committee. He opened with a polished little speech about safety, sunlight, and the importance of reasonable maintenance between neighbors. Then he looked right at me. "I am disappointed that a simple tree issue has been turned into a campaign to damage my reputation and interfere with a lawful sale," he said. There was a murmur around the room. For 1 second, I could feel the old instinct to defend myself fast, to explain Mara, to explain Claire's swing, To explain that, I had paid to trim the branches over his roof. But Anna had told me not to argue emotion against a man who was trying to use procedure as camouflage. So I waited. Gail, the HOA president, said the board had reviewed the documents submitted by both sides. Then she read a short statement. The HOA had no authority to decide property ownership, but it would not support any action involving removal of protected trees without documented permits and owner consent. Henry's lawyer stood and said the matter was still under review. Anna stood next. She did not raise her voice. She held up the current survey, pointed to the 3 flagged stump locations, and said, "There is no unresolved question about where these trunks stood." Henry interrupted. "The survey does not tell you where the canopy was." "No," Anna said. "It tells us where the trees were. That is what matters." Then she laid out the county notice of investigation and the arborist's written finding that all 3 trees had been healthy before removal. She showed photos from the day of the cutting, the open gate, the tire tracks, the workers in my yard, and Henry standing beside them. Henry folded his arms. "Photographs are not proof of intent." Anna nodded. "That is true." And then she looked directly at his lawyer. "Which is why everyone is waiting for the security footage Mr. Vale said does not exist." There was no shouting after that. Just a different kind of silence. The kind where every person in the room realizes a story has a hole in it. Henry's lawyer asked for a recess. Henry did not look at me as he walked outside. 2 days later, his attorney offered a bigger settlement. It was still not enough, and it still included a confidentiality clause. Anna said no. She told me this was not about humiliating him. It was about making the yard whole and making sure he could not use a hush agreement to evade the county process. The real break came a week after that. Henry's cloud storage account produced the footage. I saw it for the first time in my attorney's office. The video had no dramatic soundtrack. It did not need one. It was 4 hours of bright morning footage, clean enough to read the logo on the workers' shirts. Adopt, chasse. Henry walked with the foreman to my side gate. Adopt, Noah. He unlocked it with a key I had never given him. Later we learned he had taken it from the contractor lockbox during a previous exterior paint job. Adopt, Tris Brazice. He pointed to the first oak and made a slicing motion across his throat. Adopt, Shaptis Brazice. The foreman asked something. The camera had audio. Henry's answer was clear. They're on his side. But they're killing my view. Cut them low and get it done before he gets back. The foreman said, "You sure you want us in there?" Henry answered, "I'm the one paying. Just don't drag branches across the patio." There it was. Not confusion. Not a boundary mistake. Not a safety emergency. A plan. The footage also showed Henry telling the crew to angle the largest tree toward the swale so it would be out of sight from the street. It showed him taking photos once the canopy was gone. And it showed him, Adzece, Patruzeci unu, standing on the balcony with his listing agent, smiling at the cleared view. The county tree investigator watched the video. So did the HOA board. Henry's listing agent withdrew from the sale within 48 hours. The enforcement process moved at its own pace, as these things do, but now it had nowhere to go except forward. The county assessed civil penalties for the unpermitted removal of protected native trees. The arborist completed a full valuation using trunk size, species, condition, location, and the cost of re-establishing equivalent landscape function. A restoration specialist wrote a plan for the damaged slope, which now needed erosion control because the oak's roots had been cut and the soil had been torn up by equipment. Henry could not simply plant 3 saplings from a hardware store and call it even. The plan required 3 large boxed oaks, professionally transplanted, a 5-year monitoring and replacement guarantee, irrigation changes, mulch, soil stabilization, and seasonal inspections. Mature trees are expensive because moving them without killing them is hard. Replacing what he had taken cost far more than leaving it alone ever would have. The final agreement took just under 4 months. It was not magic. Nobody walked away in handcuffs. Nobody lost a house. That would not have been real life. But Henry did lose the thing he had counted on. Control of the story. He paid $18. 600 inches county civil penalties and permit-related fees. He paid $64. 400 for the restoration and mature tree installation plan, including the 5-year care bond. He reimbursed my survey, arborist, legal, and documentation costs. He also paid a separate negotiated amount for the loss of the original trees and the disruption to my property. By the time it was all added up, the number was a little over $112. Ling, ling, ling. He had cut the trees to improve a listing photo. The house sat on the market for nearly 5 months, and he eventually sold it for less than he had expected after the county action became part of the disclosure conversation. I never celebrated that. I did not want his life ruined. I wanted him to understand that another person's land is not a staging area for your financial plans. The most important term was not the money. It was the acknowledgement. At the next HOA meeting, Henry had to read a statement before the board. The HOA could not force a public confession as punishment, but the settlement required him to correct the false statements he had made at the emergency meeting and retract his complaint that I had harassed him. He stood at the same podium where he had called my trees a maintenance burden. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just stripped of the certainty he had worn like a jacket. I made false representations about the ownership and condition of the trees removed on Mr. Reese's property, he said. I authorized work without his consent and without required county approval. Mr. Reese did not interfere with my sale or harass me. I apologized to him and to the association for the disruption I caused. That was all. No excuse. No phrase about a misunderstanding. Just the truth. Finally said out loud. After the meeting, a few people came over to tell me they were sorry. They had believed Henry at first. I told them I understood why. He had sounded confident. He had paperwork from a contractor. He had a lawyer's letter. Confidence can look a lot like truth when you have not seen the documents. The new oaks went in the following winter. They were not as old as the ones Henry took. Nothing could make them that old. The biggest box tree arrived on a flatbed and took 6 men and a crane to set into place. For 2 days, my backyard was mud, straps, oses, and people checking root balls. Then, slowly, it became a yard again. Claire came over that spring with her little boy. He was 4 and full of questions. He stood beside the largest new oak and asked why it had so many ropes around it, so it can stand straight while it gets stronger. I told him. He thought about that for a moment. Then he asked if he would be allowed to climb it someday. I said, someday, yes. That was the part Henry never understood. The trees were not just blocking his view. They were holding memories. Shade, soil, birds, and the promise that something planted before you arrived might still be there after you are gone. Anna stopped by a few days later with coffee. We stood by the new trees and watched the irrigation run. You know what bothers men like Henry most? She asked. That they get caught? No. That the record exists. They can argue with a neighbor. They cannot argue with their own camera. She was right. I never wanted revenge. I wanted my property respected. Henry learned that the difference between a view and a right is sometimes just a survey pin, a county file, and the video you thought nobody would ever see. If a neighbor cut down trees on your land and claimed the branches gave them the right, what would you do first? Try to settle privately. Call the county. Or get the survey confirmed? Some people would say I pushed too hard. Others would say 3 old oaks deserved every bit of the fight. Where would you draw the line? Leave your take below. I read more of these than you might think. This video is a dramatized storytelling narrative based on real-life themes and HOA regulations. Names, characters, and specific locations have been changed. Visuals are generated using AI tools for illustrative purposes only.